Hey guys, it's Steve here, and welcome back to part 2 of my beginner Blender tutorial Lightsaber creation series in Blender. This will be the second part where we render and materialize it and finish it up. So it'll be fun. We'll be doing the finishing touches on our scene. So it should be a lot of fun. Whoa, okay, stop freaking out on me, Blender. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is pull it up to be on level with my plane here. So go ahead and grab it and your little hook there, and just go front view, and pull it up to sit on that red plane there. Real good right there. That's about perfect. Okay, now I'm going to go Shift S, cursor to center, and Shift A, add in a plane. This will be our floor. Just scale her up until she's big enough. And that should be pretty good. So let's place our camera now. I want our camera to be right about this angle here. So I'm just going to go position my viewport there by moving it around the middle mouse button here, and go Alt Control 0. And that will snap my camera to that angle. Cool. Not bad. Now it looks like we might have to make this a little bit bigger, and I want to change the focal length of my camera. So if you've ever taken a picture before, basically it's the zoom of the camera, and it's over here in your camera settings, right there, focal length. We want this to be about 70. I want it to be pretty zoomed in. So do that, and then pull it out a little bit by hitting G and your middle mouse wheel, and stopping right around there. So that looks perfect. And we can just scale up our background a little bit to fill in the corners so it's perfectly full. And we got it. So there we go. Just kind of positioning it, holding shift so it doesn't move too much. It kind of slows down the amount things move when you hold shift down. And that looks good. So now let's do some materials. So the materials are all going to be done within cycles, not Blender render. So we're going to change here to cycles render. All right. And now if I switch rendered view, you should be able to see what it looks like in clay form. That's basically our plain old render right there. So before we get into it too much, let's add in a few lamps, or let's adjust the lamp we have here. So we have a basic lamp here, and if you deleted it, just add it back in. It's a basic lamp. And click Use Nodes, and change the strength to be something around 300. I think I'll take. I think it'll be good. And give it just a very slight blue hue to it, because that kind of looks nice. I'll go rendered view, and there you go. Doesn't look too bad. 300 might be a little strong. We might crank that down a little bit to 150 or something. It all depends on how it ends up looking in the end. But I think for now I'll leave it around 200. Okay, now I'm just going to duplicate this lamp once to be over. I'm just kind of moving around here, basically to side view or front view. And I'm just going to Shift D, pull it down to the other side and a bit lower. Alright, now I'm going to also pull it kind of back here to be at the backer corner of the lightsaber. Right around there. Alright, perfect. Now this lamp I'm going to make less powerful, give it just like a 50, and give it a slight reddish hue, just so we kind of have some cool contrasting colors there in the background. Alright, not too bad looking. Maybe a little strong though. So I might make that 30. Alright. Maybe just raise it off the ground a little bit more then. Cool. Now this one might be a little bright at 200. Maybe I'll leave it at 150 like I had it. And that should do it for the lamps. Now for our world settings, I'm going to click on the world there. We want to choose use nodes as well, but I want the color to be black. So there's absolutely no light coming from the world, and it's just these lamps adding the light to the scene. Awesome. That looks good. And if I turn the strength down, okay, the strength doesn't make a difference when you have it set to black, it seems. So with that done, let's start adding our material together. So before we can add the materials, we need to do a quick unwrap job. It's called UV unwrapping, and if you've never did it before, it can be a little confusing when you try and think about it. But basically, think of it as if you were going to wrap this lightsaber in some wrapping paper, and you wanted it to fit perfectly within all the crevices and everything without crinkling, you'd have to cut your wrapping paper just so it rolled around this. Now that's basically UV unwrapping. It's basically cutting up the mesh so we can get it nice and flat back to the form of something square, like a texture. So to do this, I'm going to tab into edit mode, And this is going to be a really easy unwrap job, nothing complicated in this. I'm just going to grab the bottom row of vertices here. Let me go front view. Awesome. Hold Alt down and click that bottom row. Let's go over one. That bottom row there. Awesome. And I'm going to go Control E, mark seam. Mark seam right there. And that is basically the mesh will be cut and folded, unwrapped basically, if you can imagine that. So that's good. And now the only other thing I need to really do is take this button off of it, because this button won't unwrap nicely up there. So I'm going to grab that edge loop right there around the button and go Control E, mark seam. And then to make this button unwrap properly, I'm going to grab, let me see here, just switch to face select mode. All right. And just, yeah, basically we just want to alt click that edge there. Not that edge, but that edge. There we go. Okay, now we have too many faces selected here, so I need to deselect some of them. Easy way to do that is by hitting C, and I get my circle select here. I can change the size of my mouse wheel, and if I middle mouse click, it deselects whatever I'm hovering over. So I'm just going to do that, and hit C, and middle mouse button to deselect everything that I don't want. And I just want them from that red line that we placed upwards. And I don't want them in the center here either, so we can uncheck those. There we go. Cool. And we should still have these selected over here, so just do the same thing. Unselect everything going up to that red line we added. Around back. Let's check this side. Okay, unselect you. And around. So very easy. And then that one in the middle there too. We don't want nothing in the middle. Cool. So just go Control E and mark all those as seams. And they'll be nice and red, so you can see they're marked. Awesome. So now what I'm going to do is unwrap this this lightsaber. So let's bring up a separate window for our UV image editor here. Drag it over. Switch to our UV image editor right there. And I'm just going to go select all by hitting A. And I don't need to unwrap the beam here. So this last loose part here, I'll just go Shift L, hover over it, and hit it. I'll deselect it by holding Shift L. And I'll just go U and cylinder projection. And there we go. We get a nice unfolded lightsaber. Cool. So now when I open up a texture, it will place across this perfectly. Awesome. So let's put some textures on it and materials. So I'm going to go now from my UV image editor over to my node editor. And the node editor is where all the magic will happen. So if you've never used nodes before, let me just close these things off, T and N. If you've never used nodes before, they're very fun. Basically, you can think of them as each being their own little effect that you add to the line of effects here, and then you can come back and tweak the little settings on them. So to start, I'll add in the basic texture. Well, actually no, I'll add a basic glossy shader on this. So I'm going to go Shift A, add in shader, glossy shader. There we go. And I'm going to mix the two of these, the diffuse and the glossy, by Shift A, add in a glossy shader. Shader, glossy. Drop it in there. Whoops, I'm sorry, I just did glossy. Shader mix, and mix the two of them by plugging the top one in the top, bottom one in the bottom, and then grabbing that one and putting it to there. So now it should be glossy. And if we go rendered, we can see it's very glossy. So now that I have the glossy shader put on there, I want to add in a few more lights. Now these are going to be just some long, narrow lights going along the sides, like a beam light or a long bar light, to add in some cool, shiny reflections. So first off, let's make the reflections a little sharper by taking the roughness down. And you can see you get a sharper reflection there. So I'm just going to be tweaking that for now, down to something about 0.1. Alright, so now back in solid view, let's add in those bar lights. So I'm just going to go Shift A, add a plane, pull it over here. Whoops, get a hold of it. Can't grab it. I'll just hit G. There we go. Let's scale it down, and then let's go to top view by hitting 7, and let's scale it along the y-axis to give it a nice long shape. Cool. Now this needs the basic material, and we want it to be a light material. So to do that, we're going to go to Materials, New, and instead of diffuse, we want emission, to emit light. And we'll give it about a 5. Alright, let's scale it down a little bit more, and a little bit more along the Y. Alright, now if I go to front view, I'm just going to rotate it so it's facing right at that lightsaber there. Right around there. Alright, make sure it's not in my camera. I want to pull it back behind my camera more. If it is. Cool. Now if I go rendered view, we should see an extra bars too coming in there. And if you can't see it, just make the light a little brighter, and then you'll see it. So I might have to leave it at something like 10. There we go. Make that 10. There we go. Okay, cool. Now you can move it in a little closer if you move it along the side here too. So something like that. To get just a little closer, because the closer it is, the better it will look. Alright, that looks like it's working pretty nice. We see it along there. Now I'm just going to add one more of these to give it 2 bars of reflections like that. So I'll go in front view, maybe make this one a little bit lower, and then we'll add in one more above it by hitting Shift D, pulling it up, and kind of rotating it towards it. Oops, stay in front view. Maybe make this one a little bigger too. There we go. Awesome. Now we just have to make sure it's out of view of the camera. Alright, so now if we go rendered, we should have some of these shiny bars coming along here. If you don't see it too well, you can try making the roughness a little sharper, and then you can really see it. So it's working. So let's just leave that at about a 0.01, so we can still see it, but it's not too sharp. And let's get into our materials now. So that's the basic glossy material with the lights on it. Cool. Let's make it look realistic now. So let's give ourselves a little bit more room here, and let's get started. So to start, I want to add in that a texture to put across this UV unwrapped mesh. Now, what I find very helpful in the node editor is using a handy little add-on called Node Wrangler. And this add-on right here, just start typing in node in the blended preferences there under add-ons. You click that checkbox and now it's enabled. And this just kind of speeds up your workflow when working with nodes, because at any point you can go Control Shift and click on a node, and it will isolate that node to show you exactly what that node is doing. So you can see here, if I do that, it's pure glossy, and if I go here, it's pure diffuse. So it just really helps to be able to jump around, and there's the mix to see what they look like. So that's what I'm going to use to speed up my workflow here. Now let's just add in that texture. So I'm going to go Shift A, add in texture, image texture. Now this texture is just a basic bare metal material. The texture will be linked in the description, and you just want to open it up. Whoops, what happened there? There we go. Oh, I think I'm doing image sequence. I want image texture. There we go. And then click open there. Textures, metal bare. Cool. So if I go rendered now, we should see nothing. But if I Control Shift that texture, you can see what it looks like across our mesh. So it's working nicely. Now I want to be able to kind of adjust how much it scales across that texture. So to do that, I need to add in a mapping node. So vector mapping. Place it right behind it. Connect the vector to the vector, that image texture. And now I have all these settings that I can adjust. And I want one more node to tell it to use the UV unwrapping that we did. So I'm going to go and put texture coordinate and choose UV, plug it into the vector. Awesome. We go rendered. We have it there. Now you can see a few errors in our UV unwrap. A few areas here are really stretched, and they didn't get UV unwrapped in our UV unwrap process. So you can always come back and tweak those if you were unhappy with some of the ways it got unwrapped by selecting basically that row. Let's just go vertices here. Select those vertices and these vertices, and you can see they're right next to each other up here, and that's no good. So let's turn on the little option here that allows you to see the vertices in both modes. So choose that little box right there. Let's just grab the top row here. Boom, boom. And then if we grab those along the y-axis, we can kind of separate them here. give them some room between the two of them. Do that again on the top one here, right here and right there, and grab it along the Y. And there we have it. Now when I go rendered, you should see it's not nearly as stretched in that area, so it's a lot better. So that's how you can tweak your UV mesh, and just a few areas need it, like this one here could use it. So I'm going to do the same thing there real quick. Grab those two vertices, grab it along the Y-axis, and give it some room. So the texture is no longer stretched, at least not as badly. And there we go. If we get rendered, it should look much better. Awesome. Maybe the very end as well. Could use it here. The last bit of stretching there. Pull that up a little higher. Awesome. Rendered. Looks good. So we have the texture and we have the controls to be able to tweak it. If I go back to my node editor, we can start doing that. The scale, if I change this to be 3, 3, 3 along the X, Y, and Z, it will basically multiply the texture 3 times across it. So go ahead and do that. And now when I go rendered, we can see the texture is much smaller, more detailed looking, and I like it better. So we'll do that and leave that like it so. So what I want to do now is I want this texture not to be just directly applied to the mesh, but I want it to be applied to the shininess of it. Basically, the scratches shouldn't be as shiny as everything else. So the dirt, you could call this metal, shouldn't be as shiny as everything else. So I'm going to be connecting this to the roughness value. If I do that right now, though, you'll see it doesn't look so great. I have to go Control-Shift back to that. It doesn't look so great because I haven't really tweaked it, but you can see it kind of showing up where it's adjusting the roughness. Certain areas are shiny, certain areas aren't, and it's kind of working. It just needs some tweaking. Now, first off, what I'm going to do is, this is kind of a fun little way to give it some more detail, is I'm going to add in the input geometry node. Now this has the pointiness option, and if I show you what pointiness is by going to rendered here, I can go Control-Shift and select it. Pointiness is basically the edges. It highlights the edges of your mesh, and basically all these edges are areas where the mesh would normally be worn more because it gets rubbed and stuff. So this is going to be where I use this portion of the whites and blacks to affect where the dirt is. Alright, does that make sense? It should have. So let me just go converter color ramp, and I can tweak these settings by dropping that in there. So let's give it some more black. There we go. And let's give it some more white. There we go. Something like that. So now this is going to work by adding this texture just in the black and white areas. Alright, follow along with me? Good. Okay, so to make these this area here affect this area here, I'm going to mix them together by going color, mix RGB, drop it in there. We want this one to be in the bottom socket, and we'll put this one in the top as the factor. And let's check what that's looking like. I'm going to make the color here a bit darker so we can see just what it's looking like. Alright, and now we have it working, but it's kind of opposite, I believe. I think I want to invert this. So I'm going to go color invert and drop an invert node right in there. Alright, now that's looking not too bad. If I kind of adjusted these colors here, I should see, alright, go that ways, black, and then if I kind of pull it back, you're getting kind of what I mean. See? The white areas have the dirt in them, and everything else doesn't. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of how I'm going to work this out. So because this is going to affect the roughness, the white areas are going to be the shiny areas, and the black areas will be the darker areas. I believe that's how it works. Yes, that makes sense. So I don't want anything to be completely black because I want everything to have a little gloss. So I'm going to make this color a little bit brighter. Something around there. Let's go right about there. Now this is kind of flat looking and not super accurate to what we want. So I'm going to drop in another node to tweak this, and that is a brightness contrast node. Drop that in there, and we can adjust the contrast and the brightness, like you would guess with the brightness contrast node. So I'm just going to turn the brightness up and the contrast up a few steps to about something like that. Alright, so turn the brightness just a little brighter. Maybe not quite so bright. And the contrast up to about 0.3. And we really have the contrast popping now. Maybe go just a little bit more with that contrast. There we go. And you can see that's working nicely. Alrighty. Now, if I go to my final shader here, you can see that we have it showing up, but in the crevices and stuff, we're getting less glossiness. We're getting a less sharp glossy, I should say. It's all glossy because we're affecting the roughness. But it's less sharp of a glossy, like it's more worn and less glossy. So that's looking pretty sweet, and not too bad. So there's a few more tweaks that we can do to this though. First off, I want this to be affecting the bump of it too. The dirt should have a little bump to it. So we'll drop in a vector bump node. Alright, and then take the color into the height of the bump, and then connect the normal to your glossy and the normal to your diffuse. Now if I go rendered, we have bump applied, although it's way too much right now. If I scroll into an area up here, you can see it's coming in way too strong. So I'm just going to tweak these settings. I'm going to make the distance 0.02, so it's very, here we go, 0.02. Okay, and then the strength will just be like a 0.1. So nothing too strong. I think I want to invert this as well. Depending on which direction you want the bump going down into it, coming out of it. Alright, something like that is looking very good. Just very subtle, but that's how we want it. Alrighty. So, the color of our lightsaber will be determined by this diffuse shader here. So I'm going to make this a darker color here. And we have a darker lightsaber. And that's looking pretty nice. So the last thing to do is to add some of the color of the dirt to our saber, because it's not going to be perfectly black. So to do that, I kind of wanted to mix it the same way I did the dirt. If I gave the corners more of a highlighted color, like they were worn, and then everything else a darker color, you can see like maybe the paint is wearing off on the lightsaber a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do with this next step here. So to be able to mix into this color here, I need to basically pull that color out into its own setting. So to do that, I'm going to go Shift A, Input, RGB, and then this color, I'll just grab a little eyedropper there, will be the same one as this one. So if I drop this in, it'll be identical to how it was, but now I can add something to it. And what I'm going to add to it is our dirt. So I'm going to go a mix node, I'm going to change it to multiply, and I'll multiply some of this dirt texture right here on top of it. So drop this into here, and now I'm getting some of the dirt applied to it. If you want to see exactly how much dirt, I'll go Control Shift. This is how plain it was before, and now I'm getting some of that dirt. And you can crank it up if you want more of it, like I might. All depends on what you're going for. Maybe make this just a little less bright. Alright, maybe make this a little brighter. Okay, so now you can see what we're getting, and that's looking pretty sweet. So now the diffuse color is, it has some of that dirt on it. You can't see it too well there, but now if I crank it up higher, you can see some of it. So it's working. So if I go back with the mix shader now, you can kind of see some of that dirt coming on there real good. It's looking grungy. You might not want quite that much, but you can tweak it. Okay, so next step is that rust that I was talking about on the edges where the paint was wearing. So to do that, it's pretty simple. We're going to use the same node we already used, and that's the geometry node for the pointiness feature. Just go ahead and add that in again. Input, geometry. There we go. And we'll add in a color ramp to be able to tweak the pointiness option again and drop it right in there. Alright, so I'm going to pull the black value up. Let me just Control Shift to that. And then I'll pull the white value in a bit. And you can see we get the whites right along the edges. That is what I want. Right around there, actually. Pull it in a little tighter. So we have just the whites around the edges there. That's what we want. Maybe pull that white back a little bit. So this is areas where the lightsaber would probably be worn a lot. You can see because it's the ridges there with your hand sliding back here where it would be worn a bit. And so I'm going to bring in some of that color to the lightsaber. Now I don't want this color to be white, but maybe like a little bit of a dirtier, darker color. Something like that. What looks like some dirt, maybe. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to add it to my color. So mix, drop it in here, change it to add, and drop it into the bottom socket. There we go. And there we go. This is before, and this is after. Now we don't want it mixed in 100% necessarily, so we can adjust the amount here. And maybe I'll crank up the amount this is added to it too. Something like that. Looks good. So there you go. Now, one thing is it's not really even. It's like perfect wear, and you never have that. Nothing wears perfectly. So what we're going to do to fix that is add in a few more nodes. So we're getting quite a lot of nodes here if you zoom out, but they're all really easy to use nodes, nothing too complicated. I'm going to go Shift A, add in a texture, noise texture. Now the noise texture, if I just Control Shift here so you can see, is basically noise. It's basically noise, yeah. So to tweak the noise, I'm going to add another color ramp. So just go Converter Color Ramp, drop it in there. Now we also have it black and white. I'm just going to pull this in tighter on both ends so we can really see the blacks, we can really see the whites. Now this is kind of large noise, so I'll adjust that, but you can also see it has this vector on here. And I want this to follow the same vector as my other texture, so I'm just going to pop that vector in to that vector there. And there you go, it looks like it's mapped on there much nicer now. Now I'm going to take the scale of this up a bit to something like 12, give the detail a little bit more, and maybe just a tad of distortion. Alright. There we go. Now, this is going to be affecting how much dirt we get added on top here. So to do that, I'm just going to go Mix and multiply this noise on top of our dirt. So if I go to my dirt here now, you can see, if I turn the multiply up, that it's not perfect wear anymore, but we have that noise mixed in there to make it more random. Awesome. So now if I go to my dirt here, you can see that I'm getting the white areas added to it, but not perfectly like it was before. It's more random, and that's exactly what we want. So that's looking good, and if I go back to my finished model now, or my finished, my last node, you can see that it's looking much better. You can get that little wear in areas, and things are looking pretty realistic. So there we go. Maybe everything is a little dark, so maybe take less multiply out of that. Pull the multiply node down a little bit on there, and it brightens it up a little bit more. All right, very good. So let's add some materials to other parts of the mesh. We're pretty much finished with our metal material, I'd say. One other thing that I did that added a little realism to it is for the glossiness, I added in an IOR value. IOR is a little confusing, and I can't tell you exactly how it works. It's the index of light reflection or something like that, some technical term. But basically, it highlights the edges of your mesh, areas where you would normally see more shine on an object like this. So I'm going to add that in. Input, Fresnel, and you have your IOR value here. I'm just going to leave it at 0.45 in this case. And I'm going to add it to our brightness and contrast node here. So just go Color, Mix, change it to Add, and drop it into there. So now you can see before and after. We get the highlights along the edges of the mesh here, which will make the glossy look a little bit better. Cool. Now we might want to add in some more contrast to this after adding the Fresnel to it here. So we can just duplicate this bright contrast node and drop it in there again. Whoops, I dropped it in the wrong spot. Command Z. Shift D it and drop it in there. Alright, now if I jump to that, you can see it looks much more contrasted, kind of like what we're going for, except just a little bit too much now. So turn the contrast down a little bit. You don't want anything too black. There we go, that looks pretty good. And check what that looks like. It just gives a little bit more glossy along the edges of it and kind of makes it stand out from the background a little bit better, adding that IOR value in. Now you also see it has a normal option, so we can drop the normal from our bump into that, and it will just kind of help give it more realistic scattering from the bump. But there we go. It's looking pretty good. So one other step now to the materials, and that is giving it some variation. I added some gold areas on my lightsaber, which looked pretty cool. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to add in another material. I'm going to select that same one though. Go material 1. Now I'm going to check that little box there, which will basically duplicate it. So it's not linked anymore, and I can change these settings. And I'm going to change this color to be a brighter kind of yellowish gold color. Something like that. Cool. And now I can select a portion of my mesh and apply this material to it. So to be able to tell a difference, I'm going to change the viewport color here to be kind of a gold color as well. And now I'm just going to choose some areas, like the button top here, for example. It's something that I made gold. So I'm just going to zoom in here, and right at that ridge there, I'm going to select everything above it. There we go. And go assign. And now you can see it has that gold material on it because it's gold looking like that because of our viewport color. And now I'm just going to select a few more parts in here. This little rod here, these 2 rods actually look kind of good gold. So assign that to them as well. You can see it didn't go all the way. If I go Control plus, it will select those extra vertices that we added in. And now if I assign them, it goes all the way to them. Whoops, I did accidentally do something over there that I didn't want to do. So let me just try that again. Go top view, makes it easier. And B, select all those, assign. Alright. It's not quite going all the way to the edge there. So if I try that one more time, but go Control plus, let me see what I get. Assign. Didn't seem to work. Let me go vertex to load. Control plus. Oops. I think I did Control equals. Control plus? No, that's not working. Huh. Select those. Control plus. Oh, Control plus. Oh, there we go. You want to go your number pad plus key. I'm sorry. I forgot that. Okay, now go assign. And you can see it works much better. Now, because it is kind of going up on this mesh, we need to go Control R and tighten that down. Same over here. Control R. Tighten that down. There we go. So I'll go rendered. And you can see these areas are coming out gold. Although it's kind of desaturated gold right now, we'll want to kind of tweak that color a little bit. Let me see here. Make it a little darker, a little more enhanced gold. And it's still not quite what we're looking for. Alright, so we can't have this multiplying so much over the top of this color. Otherwise it's getting too dark of a color here. So let's just kind of take the amount of multiply down, and then we'll get a more enhanced looking gold color. Right? Maybe just a little more orangey. And that's looking not too bad. Alrighty. So one other step that I want to do here is in my color options here, go to your color options right here, and color management. Change it to film. And this will give you a more enhanced filmic look that I like. Let's take the exposure up a bit, like a 1.2. And let's take the gamma down just a little bit. There we go. And that's looking much more shiny and good. Okay, so now the gold isn't looking quite shiny enough for my liking. So I might just drop in another shader for the gold only. And that would just be another mix shader. Duplicate this glossy shader and just pop it in there and make it a little sharper so we get some of the sharp stuff on the gold as well. Maybe not quite as sharp as 0.02, but 0.0204, or maybe a little less than that, 0.03. And last step is giving the gold kind of a yellowish color in the reflections. Helped it make it look a little more gold to me. Something like that. Alright, so that's not looking too bad. Okay, and let's just make this a little less enhanced. Cool, we got a nice gold material there. The reflections on this might be a little harsh. That's why it's looking so black. So let's just go to our main black material here real quick and see if we can't make it a little less black. If I just kind of check how much the glossy is coming in there. Okay, not too bad. Let me check this. And it's adding to this. Which is looking a little dark. I think the whole thing is just a little dark. So maybe I can brighten that up a little bit. Give it a little bit of a brighter looking lightsaber. There we go. The color of the ground is kind of making it look brighter too. We might have to adjust that. Alright, so let's do that now. I just mentioned the ground. Well, hold on. Let's get the lightsaber beam turned on. She wants to be lit. Let's do it. It's super easy. Nothing holding us back. One thing with the beam is I need to go... Well, maybe I don't have to. Alright, I don't think I have to. Let's just grab that beam by hitting L. Make a new material here. Assign the material to that new one we just made there. Give it a color of about green. And give it an emission shader. Now, the way we're going to do this is we go rendered right now. And it looks good, but not actually so great. It doesn't look great because it's a solid green. What we want to do is make it less of a solid green. Something like that. Alright, right around there. And now we're going to crank the strength up until it goes about completely white. So that happens right around 10. So you see it goes completely white, but the color coming off it is still green. So that's exactly what we want. And that looks pretty good actually. Maybe 10 is a little strong. Go down to about an 8. But that's looking decent. Okay, so let's quick do this floor material. This is just a basic unwrap. Just grab the floor, hit U, unwrap. Let's pull our node editor up here. Go new material. Let's add in a little bit of reflections to get that mirror look, which looks cool. So I'm going to go mix shader, and then add in a shader and a glossy shader. Drop it in the bottom. Boom, right there. We'll make it just about a 0.2. Nothing too glossy, but make it pretty sharp. We'll go 0.01. Alright, so we want to go to camera view here now, and I go rendered. We get a nice reflection coming in the ground there. Nice and good. It looks so pretty. Now the color of the ground is going to be, let me see here, a darker texture there, definitely darker. And I'll be mixing in some of that dirt texture that we have. So let me quick do the same thing that I did on the other one. It's just going to be the image texture. We just open up that same old metal bear texture right there. We add in a mapping node, converter mapping, vector mapping, I'm sorry, and the texture coordinate node. Texture coordinate, boom. If any of this is too fast, you can pause the recording to catch up. But there we go. And now I'm just going to add in an input RGB value right there. Yep, sorry, it took a second to think. And then I'm going to go color mix, and I'll mix this in the bottom a little bit. Actually, I'll multiply it, I think. So if I plug that into there, you can see that texture kind of multiplied across there, nice and grungy. I want it to be titled by 5, so change your mapping node 5.5. So it's nice and tiled like that. And I don't want it to be so visible. So I'm going to make it just barely in there. Go about 0.9 and then make this much darker. Whoops, not quite so dark. Something like that. Alright, now I'll take that way down. The opposite direction, about a 0.1. Just want a little bit of that grunge coming in on the floor. That's kind of working, kind of not enough, maybe. Maybe go 0.15, 0.16, something like that. Alright, that's not looking too bad. It's kind of hard to see with the noise, but I'm thinking it will be good. Maybe just 0.2. On the safe side, we get some of that dirt coming out there. I can see it. It's working. Awesome. So we could go through a little bit more, add a little bump to this and whatnot, but I'm not really worried about the ground, so I'm not going to bother with that anymore. But I can kind of see how much light the lightsaber is getting now. It's looking good, But I want to quick bring this beam here up a little higher on it. So let me just kind of pull it up there, like so. And let's pull this light over here a little bit more and make it a little less intense. Like 100. Whoops. There we go. Just kind of getting the light and set up there. And I'm thinking that would look a little better. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. The beams here might be a little strong. Let me take it down just a little bit. Scale it down a little bit maybe. There we go. So that's looking good. Alright, I think we're almost ready to render and composite and then finish up this scene. I might just make the lightsaber slightly brighter by going to my saber settings here and making this, maybe just multiply that a little less. Something like that. Maybe add a little bit more of the wear in there just so we can really see that kind of coming up on the edges there, because that looks cool. Let me see what that's looking like. Yeah. A little more wear and tear. Let me give the lightsaber just a slight blue hint. Alright, and a little bit brighter. Okay, now don't forget to select your last node there before leaving. Alright, man, that's looking decent. So there's our lightsaber. Now, a few things before rendering that you want to quick check off is, first off, we want to separate the beam so we can do some cool effects in the compositor on it. So just grab that beam, it's already selected, go pass index down here, and change that to 2. Pass index will be just 2. And now under the render layers here, I'm going to go passes, and I'm going to choose, where is it? Right here, material index. You want to check that and turn it on. And we also want to turn on AO. So make sure both those are checked in your render layers. Now, when you're in your render layers, I'm going to have you do one last step. You might have noticed the smoke in my finished scene, and that was a really easy touch that I did with render layers and an image plane. So I'm going to quick show you how to do that as well. So we're going to make a new render layer. Imagine like layers in Photoshop or anything else if you've ever worked in something like that. If you haven't, it's very simple. It's just different layers that you render out. So we're going to go plus, and we're going to change this render layer to be smoke. Just type it in right there. Not smike, smoke. There we go. And it's going to be layer 2 right there. Now layer 1, right now all of them is selected. We want that to be just layer 1 right there. Awesome. Now for the smoke layer, we might also want to turn on the material index. We'll do that just to be on the safe side. But no, actually we don't need it for the smoke. Forget it. Now let's quick add in that smoke before I render out my image. So to add in the smoke, I'm going to first turn on an add-on that makes it really easy for adding in image planes. Basically, image planes is an image on a plane, like it sounds. So I'm just going to start searching for image, and you see you get import images as planes. That's what we want. Just check it out, and there's 2 add-ons we have enabled now. With the cursor right around the point of the lightsaber there, I'm going to go Shift A, add in images as planes. Now this is just a simple smoke texture, link in the description. There's a whole bunch of different smoke textures that you can get, just like this one, on cgtextures.com. And they all look cool, so you can kind of try a different one if you want it to be original. So I'm just going to scale this up real quick, and double tap R to kind of free rotate it, as you can see here. And I'm going to kind of free rotate it upwards by moving my cursor around, and then rotate along the Z to kind of spin it around that ways, and just kind of place it in there. Maybe scale it down a little bit now. And if I go rendered view, I can kind of position it better now. You can see it's this blue smoke, and I just kind of want it coming from the tip there. And I also want to flip it around. So to flip it around, I'm just going to scale it along the X -1. And I think that just flipped it right there. SX -1. Nope, that didn't work. I'm sorry. I'm just going to free rotate again, double tap R, and spin it around. There we go. That's exactly what I want. And now I'll just kind of place that smoke stream coming from the tip there. So I'm just zooming in there, placing the smoke right in there. Maybe scale it up a little bit. Something like that. Looks kind of sweet, doesn't it? Not bad. So I'm going to go solid. Let's kind of rotate that down a little bit. Okay, let's rotate it up a little bit too, straighter. Drop it in there. And I'm going to move this to layer 2. And now if I hold shift and click on both those layers, they're both on, but they'll render on separate layers. Awesome. So one last thing before we render is going to be to give a little depth of field to our camera. So I'm going to turn limits on, and this will show you what the depth of field is. If you don't know what depth of field is, it's basically the focus of the camera, where it's focused on. And I want to be focused on like the center of the lightsaber, so the front and back will just be slightly blurry, and the background will be a little bit blurry. So choose the distance and drag that up. You see that yellow plus sign is where the focus mark is at. We'll put it right around there. We'll change the aperture to f-stop and just give it about a 0.3. If I go rendered and camera view now, you can see we're getting a little depth of field. But maybe too much. That's a little bit blurry back there. Maybe I'll go 0.4. And that reminds me right there that we never added a material to our little thing back here, little lever. So we can just give out the same material that the lightsaber has, material 1, and don't have to touch anything. It should work fine. Yeah, it's rendering back there. It's a little bit fuzzy because I think my depth of field is still a little strong, maybe. Whoops, just go back to solid view. Let's just give that a little bit less depth of field. 0.6 should do it. Alright, and I can make the distance a little bit further if I wanted there. Cool. Let's render this bad boy out and see what we're getting. So before I render, let me just crank my samples up a little bit here in the sampling so we get a nice clean image. I'll go 250. Should be enough for a nice clean image. And save my project. And hit F12 and render away. So F12 is the key to render, in case you were wondering. And we'll render this scene out and see what we're getting. And there's our render. So, not terrible, a little bit noisy. We could crank the samples up higher, or we could use the clamp feature here to kind of cut off which amount of brightness we want in the scene. Or we can do what I'm going to do here, and that is use a despeckle node. So I just switched to my compositing nodes here. This is just where we're going to finish off the scene with some lighting and glows and stuff like that. So I'm going to choose use nodes and backdrop. And then if I go control shift, I can see what my render is looking like in the backdrop there. So let me just pull these back there to give me some room. And these nodes are basically just like the material nodes except for compositing. And that's basically finishing up the scene. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the AO. The AO is the ambient occlusion that you can see here. And, oh, I see. My plane is putting some ambient occlusion on this, which we don't really want. So what I want to do is go to my material settings here. Right there, material settings, that little box. Not material settings, but the object settings, I'm sorry. And go to the cycle settings and turn off shadow. Actually, we can turn off glossy, diffuse, everything. We just want to be visible to the camera. Alright, so we'll re-render that out at the end to fix that little error, but it's no big deal. For now, I'll just multiply this ambient occlusion in with the image. And I don't want it to be 100%, but just like a 0.4. So you can see that's looking nice and bad right there because of the error we made. But everywhere else is working well. So let's just not worry about that, and we'll fix it at the very end when we render out our final scene. Now, second step is to get rid of some of that noise. So that's a filter, speckle. This does a pretty good job, actually, on removing the noise. So let me just go here and change this threshold down to a smaller number, and you can see the noise just going away. I'm going to finish with like a 0.05 here. Maybe even smaller, depending on how far we need to go. 0.02 cleans it up real good. You can see just how nicely that works. And that's it. It's cleaned up. So, what I'm going to do now is add in that nice lightsaber glow we want. Okay, so to do that, that's what I did that ID MX for. That basically separates the materials out so I can edit them in the compositing. But you need to drop in a input. Is it input? Let me see here. Converter ID mask. Put that in there, and now we can change that to 2. Or is it 3? I thought it was 2. Maybe I put that on the wrong layer. let me check that real quick. The wrong material. This material, oh, I did. I put it on the blade and not the beam, the handle. Put that back to 0, put the blade to 1, and I guess we'll be re-rendering it right away because I need that to be working. So we'll render it now, fix both those errors, and should be good to go on from there. And I'm back, and it's rendered out again, and you can see that both the errors are fixed. This one is no longer showing the black marks where it shouldn't be, and this one shows the proper ID mask right there when I switch to 1. Perfect. So back to our main image here. Just hitting Control Shift to jump back and forth. If you guys were wondering, Control Shift and left mouse button. What I'm going to do is blur this twice. All right. So I'm going to add Filter Blur, drop it in there. I'm going to choose Fast Gaussian, Relative, and then this one will be blurred about 1. So just a simple blur right there. And then I'll duplicate it. Here we go. And I don't want to connect it to anything but itself again. And this one will be blurred about 5. If I check that out, you can see what it's looking like there. Nice blur. Just kind of pull both these up. Now I want to add them together. So I'm going to go Color Mix, Add, and drop it in the bottom there. The top one into the bottom. So we have that nice beam right there. But you can see that everything is blurred, and we don't want that. And that is what this ID mask is for. Basically, I'm going to take this ID mask and kind of tweak it a little bit with a few nodes. First node being a filter, delete and erode. Connect that up, change it to feather, and crank that up to about a 5. You can see now that it is a little larger and more feathered. Maybe we could go even further with that. We'll leave it at 5. Now, another thing is this is not a bright enough white for my liking, this ID mask. So I'm just going to enhance it a little bit by adding in a basic converter math node, drop it in there, and change it to multiply, and then crank it up a bit. You can see we get a more enhanced white now, and it's just what I want. Okay, so the last step now is to blur this just like we blurred everything else. So I'm going to duplicate a blur node, drop it in there, except make this one quite a bit more blurred. We'll go 8 by 8. So you have this nice blurred box there. And this is going to be the factor that we add these blurs back to our mesh with. So I'm going to go color. I'll just duplicate this add node right there. We're going to add these blurs to our layer here. Actually, we want this to be connected to our top one. There we go. And this will be the factor. So when I check that out now, you see we get that cool lightsaber glow appearing on our on top of our mesh there. Very cool. And if you want to kind of tweak the amount of glow, well, you can tweak the amount of blur with these settings here and with these settings here. Awesome. And it's all working nicely. So that is the main glow for the saber. Last things is a few glows, but we're almost done with this scene. It's running a little long, so I kind of have to wrap it up. So I'm just going to add in a few glare nodes now. Drop her in right there. Control Shift to sear. The first glare node I use is, you can really kind of have fun with these and experiment with them. This is just what I did, is crank the ladder rotations up and change the streaks just to 2, and then give them a longer fade. So we have some long fading streaks here, something like that. Kind of crazy, I know. And then I kind of want them to be on an angle this ways, so I kind of have to go all the way around. Flip the angle all the way around to like 170, I think it was. Let me see, right down there. Yeah, kind of following the handle, but not quite. Something like that, basically around there. Okay. Now I'm going to crank the threshold up as far as I can to not have too much glow. Something like that. Alright, maybe not quite that much, just we have a little more like that. It's kind of cool. And then turn the mix, actually turn the color modulation up quite a bit. There we go. And then change the mix way down. So it's almost gone, but you kind of just have a little bit of that. Ah, something's making noise in the background there. Alright, so we kind of have a little glow there. That's kind of sweet. And then I'll duplicate this. No, I won't duplicate. I'll just add another one. Another glare node. Boom. Drop this in here. Let's put this one actually in before it. This one will be basically not streaks, but just a fog glow. And turn the threshold up a little bit. Actually not, we don't need too much threshold. Turn it down a little bit. Cool. And then turn the size down maybe a little bit. Doesn't really matter, but turn the mix down. So that's just a little extra glow to your whole scene, which kind of looks cool. You just don't want too much of it. And then the last one, another glare node, because there's lots of stuff you can do with these, is going to be ghosts. Ghosts is basically a lens flare. If I show you what it looks like as a mix of one, which is basically 100% this effect, you get that. I want to crank the laterations up, and I want to turn the threshold down, so you get some really cool looking stuff. Turn the color modulation up, so you get some cool colors in there, and that's what we want. So now I just want to mix it in a little bit by turning that down to about a 0.9. And I don't really see it. Okay, I see it. It's showing up. You see some of the highlights over here and stuff. And I just want that to be subtle, so I'm going to leave it at that. So that is it, guys. I think I dropped in a color balance node and did a little tweaking there. You can do that if you want. But that's basically your finished lightsaber, rendered and lit up. So I added a color balance node and I tweaked just a few of these settings. I think I brightened the shadows slightly, just slightly, but darken the mids. These are the mids, these are the shadows, these are the highlights, basically. So something not quite as drastic as I just did there, but alright. Looks kind of cool. Alright, so that's about it though. You could change the colors, the shadows, and everything else if you felt like doing that. And one last thing I almost forgot is we got to add that little touch of smoke back in. So what I'm going to do for that is just add in a basic render layer by going Shift A, Input, Render Layer. And I think I'll add this in back before the glows here. So let me just kind of give myself a little bit of room here by moving the glows and glares down a bit. There we go. And I'm going to switch this render layer now from the basic render layer over to our smoke render layer. And you should be able to see just black with some smoke. So I'm just going to use a basic color mix, and I'm going to change it to add. And I'm going to put this one in the bottom socket there. And we get the smoke coming in really nice and cool. I'm just going to turn the amount down to be something subtle, like 0.2, so you get that nice little bit of smoke. And then the last thing that I did was drop in a color balance here as well, so I can kind of make it look a little less blue and a little bit more green. So just go color, color balance, drop her in there, and then we can give it somewhat of a green look here. And you can see that kind of adjusts it properly. You can change the highlights too if you want the highlights to be a little bright green or whatever. Make it a little bit standing out, you know, anything you want. But that's pretty much it, and it looks pretty sweet. So that's the final touch, and that is, I'm just going to go Shift Space to make that full screen, and then you can hit Alt V to zoom in or V to zoom out. But that's it, guys. That is your finished lightsaber scene in Blender. So thanks for following along, and hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you created something awesome. If you did, share it in the comments because everyone loves to see the finished results. And that's it for me, guys. So I'll see you later. Bye-bye.